Tonight, the air seems heavier than usual. There are nights like that, when the silence does not bring a feeling of peace but is like a thick curtain hiding something waiting with bated breath. The weak moonlight crept through the leaves, drawing strange patterns on the bedroom wall, and I lay here, listening to my heart beating in my chest, an unusual rhythm that seemed to foretell something bad. I live in a modest house, nestled in a quiet suburban corner. In front, there is a small lawn, surrounded by a few simple fences, a very ordinary scene. But there's one thing I've always especially loved: the wooden front porch. The old boards had a unique creak every time someone stepped on them, a sound that I had always found oddly comforting, a sign of familiar life in the house. At least that was before the night everything started to change. I have never doubted my feeling of safety here. This neighborhood is inherently very peaceful. There has never been anything that made me worried or insecure, until I first heard those footsteps, slowly, deliberate, creaking on the wooden boards of my porch in the middle of the night. All feelings of comfort suddenly disappeared like smoke. That night, I remember waking up with a start, not sure what time it was. The house was in darkness, with only weak light from the street lamp shining through the curtains. My heart was pounding so hard that my chest felt like it was about to burst, before my brain could even realize the reason. Then I heard it again, a very light, almost gingerly, creaking sound of a footstep on a wooden plank, just outside my door. I stiffened, breath caught in throat. Adrenaline rushes through the veins. Who would be out there at this hour? A thief? Or something else? I held my breath, straining my ears to listen, trying to find any more clues: a voice, a cough, any sign of who or what standing on my porch. But then the sound suddenly stopped. The silence became heavier than ever. I forced myself out of bed, my hands shaking as I fumbled to turn on the small lamp next to the living room couch. The weak yellow light spread. I half expected, half feared to see a silhouette against the window, but there was only my own reflection looking back, pale and trembling. Gathering all my remaining courage, I tiptoed out the main door, pressing my eyes to the peephole. Outside on the porch, the only light remained on, creating distorted, dancing shadows across the yard. Nothing, not a single movement, but a vague sense of unease remained, an awareness that someone or something was still present, just out of sight. My muscles tensed with the urge to yank the door open, but a sudden chill ran down my spine, holding me back. Even though I'm scared, I need to know. Curiosity, or perhaps another nameless fear, drove me. I turned the lock and pulled the latch. The door slowly opened. Empty. The empty night swallowed me. Cool air rushed in, gliding over my skin. The porch light flickered strangely, making the shadows on the yard seem to be squirming and more alive. My eyes scanned the darkness, from the fence to the end of the road. And then, my stomach tightened. Near the sidewalk, under the dim light of the streetlight, I saw a silhouette. Not exactly a standing person in the conventional sense. It was tall, skinny, and almost just a dark silhouette with unclear details. It seemed to be looking straight at me from afar. The weak light made it impossible for me to make out the face, but its standing posture exuded an unsettling stillness, a menacing immobility. I quickly reached out and turned on the porch light switch, hoping that stronger light would illuminate the path. But the moment the bright white light brightened, illuminating that location, the figure disappeared. Only the bushes gently swayed, even though there was not the slightest wind that night. That's just the beginning. The next day, I tried to tell a friend about it over the phone, trying to force a smile to hide the still simmering insecurity. I said that maybe it was just a random passerby, or maybe it was my imagination in a semi-conscious state. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't an illusion. Something was out there. It recognized me, and since that night, I always felt like I was being watched. The following nights, my sleep became fitful. Every creak of the old wooden planks on the porch made me shiver in fear. Several times, I jumped up from bed, sure that I heard footsteps again. But every time I checked, flashlight firmly in hand, I found nothing but the familiar emptiness of my front yard. The only constant was the oppressive silence in the air, as if the whole world around me was holding its breath, waiting. Many days passed without the reappearance of that figure on the sidewalk. A small part of me began to hope that whatever I had seen, or thought I had seen, had gone away. But that hope is fragile. About a week later, I was awakened from my restless sleep by another sound. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It sounded like claws or fingernails scratching on wood. A dry, long grinding sound, making my entire body convulse in fear. My mouth went dry immediately. I groped for the flashlight on the nightstand, my hands shaking so much that I dropped it on the floor. When I picked it up and turned it on, a narrow beam of light cut through the darkness of the bedroom. My breath sounded loudly in the suffocating silence. I gingerly walked to the door of the room, hesitating. The scratching sound, which had been so clear before, was now silent. Gathering all the courage I could, I opened the door a crack, preparing to face whatever was out there. Once again, everything looked normal. The porch was empty under the yellow light. The boards did not appear to be visibly damaged. I didn't see any creatures or intruders lurking, but the air felt stuffy, uncomfortably heavy. I remember old stories where the main character felt eyes watching them. It sounds cliché, but in that moment it was the only way to describe this feeling. I could have sworn I was being observed from some hidden location. My mind flashed again the image of the dark shadow behind the fence, crouching and waiting. The next morning, determined to shake off my growing paranoia, I circled the yard, meticulously searching for traces. Anything, shoe prints, animal prints, something so I can attach this horror to a specific entity, human or animal. And I found it. Faint tracks led from the sidewalk up to the porch. They were very strange, almost elongated, not like normal human footprints, but not quite animal tracks either. They weren't distorted beyond recognition, but different enough to give me chills. Perhaps the mark of a very large pair of boots or something else. The path of the tracks led straight up to the porch, circled around a beam supporting the roof. Then, they disappeared, right in the middle of a wooden plank. There was no trace of continuing into the house, nor any trace of returning. It was as if the visitor had simply vanished into thin air, or lifted off the ground. My stomach turned when I thought about it. I tried to tell myself that it must be a trick of the light, or maybe an incomplete print due to the uneven ground. But deep inside, I felt my rational explanations slipping away, leaving a creepy void. From that point on, my nights took on a completely different rhythm. Instead of trying to fall asleep, I lay awake, listening to every creak and every groan of the old house. I started to notice the silence outside. It was not the normal silence of a sleeping neighborhood. It was an unusual, heavy silence that gave me goosebumps. Sometimes I would stand up, lift the curtains and look outside, scanning the yard for any movement. The light from the street lamp seemed to flicker more frequently now, or perhaps I was simply more aware of its slightest fluctuations. The shadows shifted constantly, and sometimes at the edge of my vision, I caught a glimpse of a shape, but it always disappeared when I tried to focus. On one of these nights, I caught a glimpse of something near the bushes, a short figure as if bending over. My throat tightened, my heart pounded against my ribs. Unconsciously, I pressed one hand tightly against my chest, as if trying to calm the frantic beating. I squinted, desperately searching for any detail: an arm, a face. But it was just a dark, irregular shape, like a twisted tree branch or a hunched figure. The longer I looked, the more I felt it was staring at me. My mind screamed at me to back away, to turn off the lights, to do anything other than stand there, exposed to that invisible gaze. But I can't move. Cold sweat broke out at my temples. My feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. It felt like hours passed before the shape slightly shook and disappeared into the darkness. Only then did the tension in my muscles release, causing me to tremble uncontrollably. Dawn broke. I was exhausted both physically and mentally. I began to seriously doubt my own sanity. Are these scenes real? Or am I succumbing to some kind of stress-induced hallucination? Maybe I'm becoming unhealthily obsessed with some random intruder? But even that rationalization feels hollow, because deep inside, I knew there was something more. The footprints ended abruptly, the sound of scratching on the porch. An unnatural presence loomed behind the fence. These were not the actions of a simple intruder. I tried to confide in a neighbor, tremblingly mentioning that I had been hearing strange noises at night. The neighbor seemed half concerned, half confused, then suggested that it might just be a raccoon or stray cat. I nodded politely, but I didn't believe it. And even as I recounted my ordeal, I noticed how my voice faltered. The sheer strangeness of it makes me sound like someone who is losing his mind. I was secretly hoping that talking it out with someone else might ease the feeling of fear, but it only emphasized how alone I felt facing this. Several more nights passed with the same unnerving routine. The heavy silence, the rising tension in every joint, and the subtle but unmistakable feeling of being watched. Then one evening, I heard the scratching sound again. But this time, it's different. More frantic, more urgent, as if something was trying to dig and get under wooden planks on the porch. My skin crawled with goosebumps from the urgency of that sound. Instead of rushing out the door, this time I chose to stay inside. I pressed my ear to the wooden floor near the door, trying to figure out what the creature was doing. I could feel slight vibrations passing through the floor. Panic flooded my system. The adrenaline rush made my breathing difficult, shallow, and rapid. I felt a metallic taste in my mouth from biting my lips too hard. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Is there something invisible crawling around under my eaves at night? Finally, the scratching stopped. Perhaps an hour had passed, or perhaps only 5 minutes. In my agitated state, time became meaningless. When I finally dared to open the door, the night was as dark, silent, and empty as ever. The beam of my flashlight skimmed across the wooden planks. And then I saw them. Deep cuts, definitely not there before. They looked like sharp claw marks, each about an inch or two long, piercing through the thick wood. Terror solidified in my gut. That's when I detected movement near the bushes. That form has returned. A streak of black contrasted with the deeper darkness around it. It made no sound, no apparent movement except for a slight change in shape, indicating it was turning to look at me. I slammed the door shut, my heart stuck in my throat. For a long time, I stood frozen in the entrance, my hand clutching the doorknob, sweat pouring out. Then I hastily locked all the latches. But even that didn't give me any sense of security. I turned on every light in the house, hoping to dispel the encroaching darkness. The harsh light of the living room lamp shined on the bare walls, further revealing how alone I truly was in this war. My mind was spinning with chaotic thoughts. Should I leave? Should I stay up all night? What if I try to face it? Sleep is impossible. Whenever I close my eyes, I see that figure behind my eyelids. I felt ghostly claws clawing at my consciousness. I kept imagining the wooden planks on the porch being torn apart, and something terrible crawling out from underneath. My reason began to crumble, replaced by primal fear. Every little noise made me jump. Each shadow becomes a potential threat. I have never felt so vulnerable in my own home. In desperation, I spent the next day reinforcing the awning. I tacked up any boards that seemed loose. I even spread a thin layer of flour on the steps, in the faint hope of capturing clearer footprints if the entity returned. My nerves are always as tense as guitar strings. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half hoping and half afraid to see that faint figure lurking somewhere across the street. Under the weak sunlight that seemed unable to completely dispel the fear that had eaten deep into my bones. Night continued to fall. I sat by the window, turned off all the lights in the house, trying to stay calm enough to observe. The layer of flour on the porch shines faintly under the yellow light. Around midnight, the boards creaked again. My lungs tightened. Comes again. But this time, I refused to rush out the door. Instead, I stood behind the curtain, looking out. The creaking moved slowly across the porch, as if something was prowling, pacing back and forth. Then I heard the scratching sound again. That terrifyingly familiar sound echoed again, mixed with my own shallow breathing. After a while, the movement stopped. An ominous silence reigned. I forced myself to look out the window, my heart pounding in my chest, certain I would see footprints in the flower. What I saw made my stomach turn. There are indeed footprints, but they were still strangely elongated, more like animal footprints than human ones. They crept across the porch, and then, halfway through, they were simply over. There were no steps forward, no signs of turning back. Just a sudden stop in the middle of the planks. It was as if the creature had disappeared into thin air. A cold wave of terror spread through my body. My vision blurred at the edges, and my hands began to shake uncontrollably. I feel like I'm standing precariously on the edge of reality. There is no reasonable explanation for something disappearing into thin air like that. My mind reeled with terrifying possibilities. Was this entity bound by the laws of nature? Could it come and go as it pleased, taunting me from another dimension? I can't bear it anymore. Mustering up my courage, I grabbed my digital camera and gingerly walked out onto the porch. The boards groaned under my weight, echoing the ghostly footsteps that had haunted me for so long. My legs wobbled, and it took all my willpower to hold on. I took a few quick photos of the footprints and fresh claw marks. I needed proof that I hadn't lost my mind. In the faint circle of light from the porch light, I could see the disturbed flower where the trail ended, as if the last footprint belonged to some ghostly presence that had simply vanished. Suddenly, the bushes nearby rustled, louder this time. I turned around in surprise. That's it. The shadow. Stand right outside the railing, half hidden behind the foliage. It seemed taller than I thought, with elongated limbs or body parts, or perhaps it was just an illusion created by the darkness and a cloak. My throat tightened. My legs screamed at me to run, but I remained rooted to the spot. Slowly, as if gauging my reaction, the shape leaned forward. I felt its eyes, though I couldn't see them. A wave of deep, primal fear passed through me. My entire body was covered in cold sweat, and I was panting. I couldn't look away, even though every cell in my body wanted to. In a moment of mad determination, I lifted the camera, trying to aim it. But immediately, that figure glided faster, deeper into the darkness, completely obscured by the dense foliage. There was a flash of movement. Then there were only tree branches swaying in the dead silence of the night. My chest heaved with ragged breaths. I almost collapsed from extreme stress. Finally, I forced myself back inside, locked the door, and slid to the floor, my back against the door, my camera clutched in my shaking, sweaty hands. I never got a clear picture of that thing, but the disappearing footprints and splintered wood on my porch were evidence enough to remind me that it was real, or something close to the real thing. I seriously considered leaving, maybe staying at a friend's house for a while, but some stubborn part of me refuses to give up my home, the place that holds peaceful memories of the past. However, the horror still lingers. Even now, as I recite these lines, I can feel an uncomfortable prickling sensation along my neck, as if invisible eyes were staring at me from the darkness. I haven't heard any scratching noises in a few days, and I haven't seen anyone behind the bushes. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was gone forever, but sometimes, late at night, when the silence is deepest, I find myself listening, my heart pounding in my ears, half certain that I'm about to hear the familiar, frighteningly soothing creak of the porch boards. Every now and then, I would peek outside, only to catch a glimpse of a figure retreating quickly behind the fence. In those moments, a chilling realization hit me. This presence, whatever it is, may not be bound by conventional logic. Perhaps it was a projection of my own fears, a product of an overloaded mind. Or perhaps there is something much worse lurking at the edges of our reality. I had reached the point where I didn't know what to trust anymore: my senses, my sanity, not even the ground beneath my feet. But part of me refuses to give in completely. This house may no longer feel like the safe haven it once did, but it is mine. I refuse to let an intruder from another world, or from my own mind, rob me of my courage. Whether it is a supernatural manifestation or a psychological deviation, I am preparing for its return. I decided that if it came back, I would face it again. I don't know if I have a chance to win, or if that confrontation will only make it stronger. All I know is that living in constant terror is not living at all. So here I forced myself to wait. Every night, my heart pounded in my chest. My breathing was shallow and rapid. Every rustle of leaves outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. I was both scared and determined. Maybe I can find a way to banish this thing. Or maybe I will discover a truth too horrifying to comprehend. But right now, I sit here, possibly with the camera always by my side, eyes glued to the dark space on that porch, not knowing if I'm standing on the edge of madness or on the threshold of something distant and unfathomable. And in the deep silence of midnight, sometimes, I could swear I hear the faint echo of footsteps. A haunting reminder that whatever lurks out there is not finished with me yet. There are fears that are not limited to the four walls of your home. Sometimes they follow you out, blending into the crowd, turning places that should be fun and noisy into a stage for your own insecurities. I remember a festive night in the city. It was supposed to be a night of escapism, a release from the invisible tensions that haunted me in my house. But instead, it turned into another nightmare. As soon as I entered the crowded street, where colorful paper lanterns cast a magical shimmer on the sidewalk and the distant sound of festive music hit my temples, I felt something was wrong. The atmosphere was strangely tense, as if the night itself was breathing shallowly, waiting for something to happen. My heart pounded unreasonably for a mere celebration. The smell of fried dough and spiced grilled meat, instead of stimulating my appetite, somehow added to the nausea curling in my stomach. Decorative lights flickered erratically overhead, and all shadows seemed longer and more distorted than they naturally were. Amidst the laughter and bustle, I felt an uncomfortable itchy feeling on the back of my neck, as if someone was staring at me from afar. I tried to brush off the discomfort, convincing myself that it was just an overactive imagination, triggered by fatigue and underlying fear from sleepless nights at home. But as I weaved through the crowd of strangers, I caught a glimpse of a figure. A tall man stood a few meters away, partially hidden behind a street vendor counter. His posture was stiff and motionless amid the hustle and bustle of people. Something about the tilt of his head made my stomach turn. And then I saw it, a faint glint of metal in his hand. Camera, pointing straight at me. First, I thought I was wrong. Why did he take pictures of me among everyone at a crowded night festival like this? But the lens was definitely pointed at me, unflinching. My heartbeat became faster and faster, and a layer of cold sweat began to form on my forehead. I glared at him, hoping my gaze conveyed my annoyance, that I didn't appreciate being the subject of his photo. Instead of reacting with the typical startled expression or backing away, he just smiled. It was a smile that I cannot easily describe. His lips parted slightly, revealing teeth that seemed too straight and too bright under the flashing lights. It's not a friendly smile. It was like a taunt, a challenge. It was as if he was daring me to face him. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I tried to blend into the crowd, squeezing deeper into the sea of bustling, laughing and talking strangers. But every time I glanced over my shoulder, he was still there, always a few feet away, camera still in hand. A few steps later, I stopped near a stall displaying a waterfall of colorful ribbons. My vision was overwhelmed by the swirling patterns, but I managed to catch another glimpse of him, just beyond the fluttering silk. He raised the camera again, and I heard the soft click of the shutter. He just took another photo. My whole body is tense. My palms were sticky with sweat, and the back of my neck was slick with anxiety. Why is he so intent on following me? I walked quickly aside, hoping to blend in with a group of festival-goers admiring the arts and crafts. But a quick glance to my right confirmed that he was still there, stumbling along behind. Even though the music was loud and countless people were jostling back and forth, I felt completely alone, isolated in that stuffy crowd. Desperate to regain composure, or at least have evidence of this bizarre harassment, I pulled out my phone. I decided to take a photo of him. My heart pounded in my ears as the camera app opened. But my hands were shaking so violently that it was almost impossible to focus on his figure. When I pressed the shutter button, the results were strange. The photo becomes blurry, especially in the position of his face. It was as if my phone couldn't record him clearly. Each attempt creates a blur, a distortion where the face should be. My breathing became uneven, and the heavy feeling in my chest made me wonder if I was imagining things, or if there was some glitch with the reality surrounding this man. Determined not to let fear paralyze me, I decided to stare at him again. I turned completely around, intending to confront him from afar. This time, I noticed a strange distortion in the space around his head. It reminded me of shimmering heat ripples on hot asphalt in the summer, except it was nighttime, and the distortion seemed to stick especially to him. His smile, that intense smile, seemed to grow larger, and it looked even more unnatural than before. My breath caught as I realized that maybe I was seeing something that shouldn't exist in a normal, rational world. A wave of confusion mixed with nausea rushed over me. I felt my heartbeat pounding so hard that I was sure he could see my chest heaving with panic. I heard a group of people nearby talking about some show that was about to happen in the next block. A thought crossed my mind. Maybe I should join them, pretend to be part of their group, if only to get out of his sight. I moved closer to them, but the crowd moved unpredictably. A swirl of confetti fell from above as a parade of dancers passed by. The pieces of paper fluttering brightly in the night sky looked wrong, as if they were mocking my insecurities. In the swirl and rush of bodies, I lost sight of the man for a moment. A wave of relief washed over me, until I felt a familiar prickling sensation running down my spine. He was still there, not gone, simply changed position. Every time I tried to confront him head-on, he would sneak into a dark alley or hide behind another stall. Every time I moved, a hot wave of anxiety rose in my stomach. I became more aware of each breath, each drop of sweat running down my temple. My mouth was so dry that at times I could barely swallow. I heard the faint click of his camera's shutter again, and turned around just in time to see him lowering it. His eyes, I couldn't see them clearly, but I felt the nervousness in them, the satisfaction of having taken another photo. In the background, the hum of music and laughter seemed increasingly distant, almost discordant, like a broken track in an unsettling film reel. I decided I had to end this obsessive game of cat and mouse. Forcing my shaky legs to move, I walked straight towards him. The crowd parted for a moment, giving me a clearer view, and I picked up my pace. But with every step I took forward, he seemed to drift away, as if the crowd swallowed him up every time I got too close. The loud cheers from the festival mixed with my rapid breathing. My chest felt tight, and a heavy pressure pressed down on me from all sides. It seemed impossible to corner him amid the dancing bodies and bright neon lights. After a few minutes of frantic chasing, I discovered him standing under a dimly lit archway near the end of the street. The air here was thick with smoke from nearby barbecues, and the smell of burning meat made my stomach churn. I approached, my heart pounding so hard I could hardly think straight. He didn't move. He just stood there waiting, camera still in hand, face partially obscured by darkness and weak lighting. Adrenaline and uncertainty rushed through my veins. I stepped forward, raising my voice, even though I could barely remember what I said. It was something incriminating, demanding to know why he was following me, what he wanted from me. The answer came, not in loud words, but in a whisper, like a cold wind stinging my skin. He spoke, in a cold, emotionless voice, cutting through the chaos of the festival in a sharp and invasive way. "You don't belong here." Those words, they seemed to freeze me in place. The fear was immediate, intense, almost physical, as if an icy hand had tightened around my heart. The surrounding temperature, which should have been very hot due to the crowd and the grills, seemed to plummet. His presence radiated a bitter chill that made my limbs tense. In that moment, my mind was racing with thousands of questions, but none of them I could put into words. I stepped closer, teeth gritted despite the encroaching cold, and asked him what he meant. But a fleeting movement of the crowd blocked my view for a moment. Just one moment. When I looked back, the archway was empty. He's gone. Completely. Not a single shadow remained. No sound of footsteps fading away. My chest rose and fell with each rapid breath, and my palms trembled against my thighs. That bitter cold is still hidden deep under my skin. Confusion and fear spread through my body like poison, making it difficult for me to think logically. I frantically scanned the sea of festival goers, hoping to catch a glimpse of his creepy smile or that tall figure. But all I saw were strange smiling faces, flashing neon lights, and swirls of falling confetti. Desperation began to gnaw at me. I tried to get past the crowd of strangers, constantly looking over my shoulder, craning my neck to look in every direction. Fear pounded inside my skull. The scene around me now seemed unnatural, as if the entire festival had taken on a subtly distorted shape. The light flickered unpredictably, creating long, strange dancing shadows on the ground. The distant music once again felt harsh and malevolent, a beat at odds with my own rapidly beating heart. Sometimes I thought I caught a faint silhouette in my peripheral vision, a shape drifting between the stalls. Every time I turned around to face it, I was only greeted by startled strangers who seemed more interested in my crazy behavior than anything else. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I'm just losing my mind? Seeing visions born from my extreme anxiety? Maybe the distorted face in the photos is just a technical error due to my shaking hands or poor lighting. However, my mind kept replaying the moment he whispered that I didn't belong here, and the deep, unmistakable coldness in his voice still lingers with me. I recall the way his face seemed shimmering, impossible to focus on with the camera. No matter how hard I tried to rationalize, I knew there was something sinister, supernatural lurking behind those images and that haunting half-smile. A strange dizziness came over me. My breathing became ragged, and my thoughts became paranoid. I scanned every face in the crowd, convinced that he could be lurking behind any of them. The whole festival now felt drenched in menacing colors. They appeared so bright, almost neon in intensity, that it hurt my eyes. I found myself tripping over a souvenir table, knocking over a few knickknacks. The salesperson glared at me, but I couldn't even utter an apology. My heart beats too fast. I had an overwhelming feeling, an urge to run away, but I was too scared to leave without answers. At one point, I sought refuge near an old fountain, decorated with festive ribbons. The water trickled in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, but did nothing to steady my nerves. I cupped my hand under the faucet, splashing it all over my face, trying to maintain my sense of reality with the contact of the cold liquid on my skin. For a moment, my head cleared up a bit. I glanced around, determined to find him if he was still nearby. But everything seemed normal, a group of friends laughing, salespeople calling out potential customers, couples dancing to music in the distance. Only my racing heartbeat told me otherwise. Then, in a flash, I caught a glimpse of him, through the water of the fountain. He was partially obscured by a tattered banner advertising some local tourist attraction. My entire body locked up again. He slowly raised the camera, almost solemnly, and pressed the shutter button. This time, I clearly saw the bright light of the flash, and in that moment, his face wavered again, like a reflection in disturbed water, refusing to change to solid form. When the flash ended, he disappeared back into the noise, as if he had never been there. My head was pounding, and a shiver ran down my spine. I found myself panting, as if I had just sprinted for miles. That was when I accepted that I might have been caught up in something beyond human rational understanding. My legs felt unsteady, and I wobbled against the edge of the fountain. I wanted to talk to anyone, to share this horrifying experience, but I doubted anyone would believe me. There is no evidence except a string of useless photos, which refused to show his face. My mind throbbed with the memory of his words. "You don't belong here." That statement resonated within me as a warning, or perhaps a declaration of something bleak, indescribable. Summoning the last remnants of my courage, I forced myself to walk towards the center of the festival once more. Every step is a great effort. The possibility that I would ever see him again scared me, but an equal fear filled me at the thought of never knowing what he really was, or why he was targeting me. Everywhere I looked, I caught a glimpse of him, or heard the virtual click of his camera shutter. I began to question my own sanity, half expecting the road to buckle under my feet or the lanterns to go out all at once. I pushed through the crowd, past a swirl of confetti and neon lights flashing overhead like an ominous omen. Sweat drenched my shirt, my pulse pounded, and my breathing was so shallow that my chest began to ache. The noise of the festival filled my ears, sometimes suffocating me with its artificial, unnatural joy. The shadows stretched unnaturally, as if reaching out to trap me. My mind reeled with the belief that I would never be able to look at a festival the same way again. But amid the growing terror, a sudden determination took root. If I really don't belong there, I want to find out why. I peered into every corner, every dark corner, looking for the last trace of him. But the more I looked, the more I realized the night was slipping away, and with it the fading chance of facing him again. The tension in the air seemed to gradually recede, replaced by an aching emptiness. The absence of that haunting presence felt like an even more devastating torment, an unresolved horror. An open wound cannot heal. Finally, I found myself at the edge of the festival, where the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned. The music faded to a distant echo. My heart was still pounding, and every nerve in my body was still on high alert. But he doesn't appear anymore. The last remnants of the celebration trailed behind me, seemingly oblivious to the horror that had stalked me all night. With a heavy feeling of resignation, I left the festival grounds and entered a quieter street. My legs felt shaky, and the air had a foul taste in my mouth. My thoughts raced. Is that man a ghost? A trick of my overpowered mind? Or something much stranger? No matter how I turned that question over in my head, I couldn't reconcile it with any conventional explanation. I remember the cold, invisible grip of his presence, and the blurred, wavering face in the photographs. I can still feel his cold breath near my ear as he said those words. Even after he left, that chill remained in my bones. I kept walking, trying to put some distance between myself and that incredible view. But my relief felt hollow. My skin prickled with the lingering certainty that his eyes might still be following me, invisible but powerful. By the time I reached my car, my breathing had calmed down a bit, but my throat was still tight and dry. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the door immediately, my fingers trembling on the ignition, as if I expected him to appear in the seat next to me at any moment. As I drove away, city lights flashed in the rearview mirror. The festival, seen from afar, was still going on, a chaotic maelstrom of artificial light. My shoulders ached with tension, and my mind raced with the memory of his last statement. No part of me feels victorious. All I carried was lingering fear, pulsing under my skin like a latent infection. I wonder if I really don't belong here? Was I somehow an intruder in a place that only tolerated my presence until he come to destroy the illusion of safety? To this day, I still glance over my shoulder every time I go out at night. The flash of a camera, or a sudden flicker of strange light, still makes me grit my teeth and my heart beat fast. The memory of his pure, expressionless smile and the empty space where his face should have been in the photos continued to haunt my dreams, often causing me to wake up gasping for air with my heart pounding. He did not reappear, but I felt something in the darkness that I couldn't put into words. An invisible fear, a suggestion that I had seen too much or perhaps too little. And whenever I feel a sudden cold wind on my neck, I remember his whispered warning. It echoed in my mind, a lingering testimony of that strange night, reminding me that the real horror often lies in what remains unresolved, in the unanswered questions, and in the feeling that there are doors that, once opened, can never be fully closed. But fear doesn't just come from completely unfamiliar entities. Sometimes it creeps into our lives through people we once knew, bringing with it an unexpected darkness. I went through this with an old roommate from college, someone I was never really close to. I remember waking up suddenly one evening, my heart pounding as if some silent alarm had pulled me from my sleep. The room feels colder than usual. My breath caught in my throat as I exhaled small puffs of condensation into the air. I sat up, feeling my shirt stick to my skin from cold sweat. Every inch of my body was tense. And even in that half-awake state, I could still feel one thing for sure. I was not completely alone. It was the first real sign that the reappearance of Drew, my old college roommate, was something out of the ordinary. And looking back, that was the moment that marked the beginning of a breathtaking horror that I never imagined I would face. Right in my own home. I was 27 years old, living with my best friend, Todd, in a small house on the outskirts of the city. This place has always been peaceful, at least before. There's a tree-lined street out front, a yard just big enough for a barbecue and a few lawn chairs, and windows that let in plenty of sunlight when the curtains are open. After all that's happened, I'm not sure I can enjoy sunlight that way anymore. I remember the day I received an unexpected text from Drew. We were placed in the same dorm room during my freshman year of college. Our relationship only stopped at the level of tolerating each other rather than true friendship. As soon as the semester ended, we went our separate ways. For nearly half a decade, I never heard from him. Then suddenly he texted, claiming that he had just moved nearby and wanted to stop by to visit and reminisce about the good old days. The message was brief and seemingly harmless, but it carried a strangely heavy atmosphere, something intangible that twisted my stomach. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to just residual anxiety or discomfort from our unpleasant history. But deep inside, I had a feeling that reconnecting with him would lead to trouble. I told Todd that someone from my past was stopping by. Todd is a pretty nonchalant person. He tells me to do what I feel I need to do, but also teases me about how stressed I seem. He even commented that I looked like I was having trouble sleeping and maybe seeing an old friend might help. But I know it's not friendship that drives Drew. I felt like he was drawn to me, to something in my life, in an inexplicable way. When Drew showed up at my door for the first time in years, I found myself sweating uncontrollably. My palms were cold and my mouth was dry. I could see him through the small window in the door. He looked almost the same as he did in college. Skinny, slightly stooped, the typical figure you wouldn't give a second glance on a busy street. But he felt distinctive. There was an empty darkness in his eyes, an emptiness that gave me goosebumps. The air around him seemed filled with silence and heaviness. And as cliché as it may sound, I couldn't ignore the sudden chill that swept into the hallway as soon as I opened the door to let him in. It feels like someone just opened the freezer door in the middle of summer. I tried to breathe evenly, trying to keep my voice normal as I greeted him. When he entered my living room, the ceiling light flickered once and then went out for a moment before coming back on. I made some excuse about the old wiring, but a vague fear rose within me. I remember the immediate tension in my shoulders, and my heartbeat pounding in my ears, so loud it drowned out the rustling of the trees outside. Todd was home that day and tried to have a polite conversation with Drew. But most of Todd's efforts only received awkward nods or monotonous answers from Drew. I tried to continue the conversation too, but my throat felt like sandpaper, and my heart didn't slow a beat the entire time he was there. Luckily, he didn't stay too long. After he left, I paced the house, trying to figure out why I was so stressed. I pulled out an old college photo album, wanting to see if I was overreacting or simply dredging up old grudges that were no longer relevant. And that's when I saw them. Black stains. In most photos of Drew's face, there appear to be strange dark marks around his appearance. They look like ink stains or mold creeping in from the edges of the photo. But these photos are digital prints, and I have kept them very carefully in a sealed box. There is no reason for them to be damaged like that. I remember watching them many times in the past, and the images were completely normal. Now it was as if an ominous shadow, an invisible rot, had somehow penetrated the photographic paper, clinging to his image wherever he stood. I showed Todd a few pictures the next day, just saying there was some strange discoloration. He puts it down to the photo's age or the cheap quality of the ink, but admits that it's strange that the stains form tiny veins, spreading around Drew's figure. He wondered if something in the printing process had reacted with the chemicals over time. But seeing those dark spots made my stomach turn. Over the next week, Drew started finding reasons to stop by more often. He will appear, sometimes unannounced, in the early evening or just after dusk, always with that same blank, unblinking gaze. He said he lived nearby, which was strange because the neighborhood is quite small and I usually know when new residents move in. And every time he comes, something else strange happens. A door somewhere in the house will slam shut on its own. Sometimes it's the front door, sometimes it's the hallway closet door, sometimes it's the door to the basement. The first few times, Todd and I blamed it on drafts or changes in air pressure. But those doors bang loudly even when there are no open windows or vents nearby. At the same time, the light bulbs in the house, especially in my bedroom, began to flicker and burn out more frequently. The light bulbs I had just replaced a few days earlier would go out with a soft bang, leaving me in sudden darkness, my heart pounding. My nights became restless. I kept dreaming about Drew's face, looming in the corner of my vision in my dreams. And always there was a dense, shapeless shadow stretched out behind him, twitching and shaking like a living thing. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Every morning, I think of ways to avoid him, to refuse him if he stops by. But every evening, when the knock comes, I find myself opening the door, with a terrible chill running down my spine, trying to smile and appear calm. Drew never really talked much. He just hovers, like a silent shadow covering my life. I started feeling insecure all the time, even when he wasn't there. The house seemed to have a different mood, like the walls themselves were watching me, absorbing my fears. I often shiver involuntarily, my skin crawling with goosebumps as if some invisible presence was hovering a few inches away. Then I started paying attention to him in places he shouldn't be, like an illusion. I saw his reflection in the bathroom mirror when I was sure I was home alone. He would stand in the doorway, head tilted slightly, while I was washing my face. As soon as I turn around, there will be no one there, just an empty hallway. Another time, I was heating food in the microwave and stared at the reflective glass surface of the oven door. I could have sworn I saw someone standing behind me, but when I turned around, the kitchen was empty. My body locked in fear, and I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my plate of food on the floor. The day after he left, I found Todd sitting in the living room, looking pale and nervous. He told me he hadn't seen anything specifically strange, but every time Drew was here, a heavy, oppressive feeling filled the house. Todd even began to lose focus on his work because he found himself dreading the moment he might hear a knock on the door. He said maybe it was time to have a frank conversation with Drew, asking him to give us space. Even so, Todd admitted he felt uncomfortable with the idea of going head-to-head with Drew. I tried talking to Drew indirectly via text, trying to learn more about why he kept visiting. He only responded with curt messages, offering no real explanation. Then the next day, he appeared again, with that same cold air, never volunteering a reason for his presence. The rational part of me screamed that this behavior was completely wrong, that my instincts were telling me to cut him off completely. But there was a creepy feeling, a suspicion that Drew knew something I didn't, and maybe he was taking advantage of my inexplicable fear. I couldn't explain why I let it continue, as if I was paralyzed by the situation, unable to make a decisive decision. On an impulse, I rummaged through old yearbooks and digital photo files, looking for more pictures of Drew. Almost every book has those dark spots around him. They clung to his form like a dark, greasy halo. And in some photos, they seemed to stretch out from his image on the page, like gnarled fingers or long tassels. My skin was covered in goosebumps and I felt nauseous. My heart was beating so fast that I had to sit down and press my palms against my knees to stop them from shaking. I wonder if there could be some natural explanation, a chemical error in the old photo? But I couldn't ignore the claustrophobic feeling of dread coiling in my gut. It was around this time that I began to seriously doubt my own sanity. I found myself constantly checking the locks on the doors and windows, half expecting and half afraid to see him standing outside, just standing there, his eyes fixed on mine through the glass. I jumped every time there was a slight noise, a tree branch scraping against the house wall, a strong wind shaking the fence. My nights became endless stretches of fitful sleep and jolting awakes in cold fear. Sometimes I wake up and swear I see a figure in the corner of the bedroom, looming near the closet door. But whenever I mustered up the courage to turn on the light, I saw nothing but an empty room. Todd tried to reassure me, although he admitted that he was equally confused and scared. He suggested we move or at least stay in a hotel temporarily. But I hesitated, I felt so paranoid that I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the empty house. Something in me believed that if I left, Drew, or the shadow that accompanied him, would follow. That bone-chilling, invisible presence accompanies me wherever I go. I was convinced that the darkness that was clinging to him was not only attached to him, but was also creeping into my world, as if I had accidentally allowed it in. Then came the night I found him outside my bedroom window. It was almost midnight, and I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with anxious thoughts. I can't sleep. I decided to get up and get a glass of water from the kitchen. As I passed by the window in the hallway, I saw a tall figure standing in the dim light of the porch light. My chest tightened. The figure just stood there, motionless, looking up at my window. Even through the darkness, I made out Drew's posture, his exceptionally lean silhouette. I stiffened on the window sill, so stiff that my nails seemed to dig into the wood. My vision darkened for a moment, and I had to remind myself to breathe. When I blinked, he was gone. Not a single movement, not a single sound. It was as if he had evaporated into the night air. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the glass of water I just took. The next morning, I pulled Todd into my room and explained everything in a low, urgent voice. He listened, his face tense. He didn't refute what I said. In fact, he revealed that he had also noticed strange footprints in the backyard a few days ago. Muddy footprints that didn't match any of our shoes. They led from the fence straight to the side of the house, then disappeared suddenly. Todd suggests calling someone, maybe the police or even a private security company. But we both know what we're going to say. Our old friend keeps showing up uninvited. He leaves weird black marks on photos and burns out our light bulbs. It sounds like we're the unstable ones. I started to feel really bad. That same day, Todd went to work while I stayed home. I took a few days off because I couldn't concentrate at the office. The house was painfully quiet, and that silence made my skin crawl even more. I locked all the doors and closed the curtains, leaving only a single light in the living room. Every creak of the floor made my pulse pound. It was mid-afternoon when I heard footsteps, very weak, in the hallway upstairs. My lungs convulsed with fear. I grabbed the cord of the light that was on, ready to unplug it if it started flickering. And as expected, as soon as I stood up, the light bulb in the lamp turned on and then went out. Darkness filled the living room, except for the weak daylight filtering through the closed curtains. I stood there, almost completely still, my breathing ragged, trying to suppress the urge to scream and run away. My whole body trembled, and my mouth was so dry that I could barely swallow. I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm, trying to tell myself that it was just my imagination. Then I heard a creaking sound, weak but unmistakable, the creaking sound of the basement door hinges. My stomach felt like it was in knots. That door was old, we rarely used the basement, but it had a very distinctive creak. I forced myself to move towards it, my heart beating so hard that I felt a dull ache in my chest. When I reached the top of the stairs leading to the basement, the smell of damp concrete and stale, stagnant air filled my nose. The basement door was ajar, even though I was sure I had locked it before. I turned on the light switch in the basement. This time, luckily the light bulb didn't go off. It emitted a faint yellow light, illuminating the stairs going down. I walked down slowly. My legs felt like jelly. My whole body was so tense that every step made me wince. The basement was empty, just a pile of old furniture, boxes, and discarded furniture. But the air here seems heavier than ever, as if a storm cloud has settled within these walls. I stood in the middle of the room, straining my ears to listen. His own breathing sounded deafening in the silence. Then suddenly, without warning, the light above me flickered several times, casting strange, dancing shadows across the floor and concrete walls. My own shadow stretched out unnaturally, and for a split second, it looked like there was another figure standing right behind me. The blood in my body seemed to freeze. I turned around quickly. Still don't see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling of something gently brushing my shoulder. My skin tingled where I felt that ghostly contact. I ran away, rushed back upstairs, slammed the basement door behind him and locked it twice. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I stood against that door for a long time, panting, trying to convince myself that I was in control of the situation. But the fear is too great. It was not just an ordinary fear, but a basic, instinctive certainty that something unnatural, malicious was surrounding me. I could almost feel the darkness tightening around my throat. That evening, when Todd came home, the sun had set and the house was again filled with long darkness. I told him, in a shaky voice and with hands still shaking from the basement, that I couldn't stay here another night. He agreed immediately, saying we should go to his parents' house across town. We hurriedly packed a few essentials, our hearts pounding with every little noise. I kept glancing toward the window, expecting to see Drew's face there, watching us. Just before we were about to leave, there was a light knock at the front door. We both stiffened. My skin was covered in goosebumps so intense it was almost painful. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a cold, extreme terror shot through me. Todd placed his hand on the doorknob, feeling the cold metal. I beg you not to open it. But I could feel my heart pounding like a war drum in his chest, making it hard to hear anything else. My breath hitched as he turned the doorknob slowly, fear clinging to every movement. Standing on the porch was Drew, with the same familiar blank expression. The streetlights cast strange shadows around him, making his skinny body look uncomfortably elongated and skewed. The air suddenly became cold, as if a cold wave from the Arctic had just swept through the yard. I felt my teeth start to chatter. That bone-chilling cold invaded me again. And in the dim light of the porch light, I saw more clearly this time. A mist, almost pitch black, surrounded his shoulders and head. It was like curling smoke or a faint shape trying to take shape. It's not my imagination. This was as real as fear burning in my veins. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me, then glanced over my shoulder at Todd. Todd took a step back, almost tripping over his own feet, and stood behind me, taking a sharp breath. In that moment, I felt something else on the porch, something retreating into the darkness as Todd appeared, an invisible presence, curled in the darkness. A wave of nausea washed over me, and my vision blurred for a second. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. I tried to keep my voice calm, even though it was shaking. I told him we were leaving and he needed to go. He tilted his head, as if considering my words. Then he took a step forward. My heart pounded in protest, and every hair on my body stood up with fear. But then something in my mind snapped, a desperate need to fight whatever force he brought. I raised my hand, almost instinctively, and reiterated that he needed to go. The atmosphere has changed. The cold persisted, but Drew seemed hesitant. The shadows around him flickered, almost as if they were alive and responding to my protests. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline that steadied my shaky legs. With shaky but firm words, I told him I didn't want him to visit anymore. No more unannounced drop-ins. My breathing was shallow, but my voice was steady. He stared a moment longer. Then he backed away slowly. An expression of possible annoyance, or perhaps disappointment, crossed his blank features. He turned and walked into the night, disappearing behind the weak light of the streetlight. The oppressive cold eased, but did not disappear completely. The porch is still unusually colder than the rest of the world. Todd and I quickly locked the door, grabbed our things, and rushed to his car. My heart didn't stop beating until we were miles away from that house. We stayed at Todd's parents' house for the next few nights. I didn't sleep well at all, constantly haunted by thoughts of Drew lurking outside the window, or the dark shadow accompanying him. When we finally mustered up the courage to return home, I prepared myself for the worst. Perhaps all the light bulbs burned out, or the door was left wide open. Instead, I found everything locked up, just the way we left it. The darkness in the house no longer seemed so threatening, but I couldn't ignore the lingering feeling of heaviness in the air, as if something had seeped into the walls and corners of the house, some residue of that presence. I still find myself occasionally glancing over my shoulder in the hallway, especially at dusk. The lights don't go off as often anymore, but sometimes I can still hear the door rattling when there's no draft. And sometimes In the quieter hours of the night, I think I see a shape out the window, a flicker of movement, a silhouette that fades as soon as I focus on it. I couldn't say for sure whether Drew, or rather the shadow that accompanied him, was truly gone, or whether it was just waiting for another time. But I knew that something about him or associated with him had changed fundamentally, something that couldn't be explained by mere coincidence or old grudges. Todd wants us to eventually move completely, and I agree that might be best. But I'm not entirely convinced that leaving this house will free me from the horrors that Drew has brought into my life. There is a permanent awareness now, a fear that lives under my skin, tearing up every time I remember the dark streaks in those photos or the bone-chilling cold that followed his footsteps. Part of me wonders if this feeling of insecurity follows me wherever I go. An invisible mark, left by a man I never really knew, and by something dark that may have haunted him for a long time. Even if I never see him again, I can never forget the dark fog that seemed to wrap around him, or the way doors slammed shut on their own in his presence. I couldn't get rid of that primal, paralyzing fear that tormented me every time he appeared in my reflection when I was alone. Some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed. And now, sometimes as I stand here, staring at my reflection in the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest, I still swear I catch a glimpse of Drew standing behind me, just for a split second. The chill returned to my spine, and a single thought presented itself to me. Perhaps he had never been just an ordinary man in the first place. And perhaps I had invited something far worse into my home than an unwelcome ex-roommate. And that thing may still be observing me from some hidden corner of reality.